So now we're going to move into two more important areas, guilt and shame. So I once had a therapist describe to me that guilt says that I did something wrong. In other words, I violated a value system. Shame, which is much deeper, and now we're talking about a mood, is there's something wrong with me. So again, these two unprocessed emotional mood states can be devastating. So here's what Maclaren has to say about that. And I would invite you to think about, are you living in, I did something wrong, or there's something wrong with me? So think about that a moment. So to follow Maclaren's protocol, what she says guilt and shame are about is restoring integrity. That is knowing who and what I really am. The gifts of guilt and shame are atonement. And I like to think about that as forgiving myself or making amends or both. Integrity. Now the word's repeating itself. So another gift, integrity, one's own integrity. Self-respect. You know, many people are suffering over the labels that have been assigned to them by the social world. So I'm going to suggest to you right now, if you've gotten any of that labeling, ask yourself this question: is that true about me? So we're talking about self-respect. And it may involve behavioral change. For example, going back to the idea that I may have violated a value that I hold dearly, you might need to do some changing behaviorally, and specifically in word and deed. Some internal questions on who has been hurt in this situation. What must be made right? So that gets back to the idea of amends and forgiveness. Some signs of obstruction: crippling, repetitive, guilty feelings. By the way, crippling, repetitive, guilty feelings are an indication of shame. There's something wrong with me. That do not instruct or heal your relationship. Another sign of obstruction: shamelessness when you are endangered by your own behavior. So that's telling you it's time for correction. Some practices: channel this intense emotion to set a strong boundary. So now we're repeating the idea of boundary. And particularly with things like when others tend to label us. You know, that's their projection. That's not, often it's not true about me. And create a sacred space in which you can atone for your transgressions. Amend your behaviors. Throw off manufactured shame. Interesting, manufactured shame. Again, that's other people's projections. You know, Don Miguel Ruiz wrote a wonderful little book called The Four Agreements, in which he talks about making new agreements with ourselves because our old agreements or existing agreements are self-destructive, one of which is do not take it personally. In other words, being able to recognize this is another person's projection. And heal your heart and your relationships. I've worked with people that live in a state of guilt and or shame, and it can be really debilitating, just like the other emotional states. So next we're going to turn our attention to joy. Now, joy is a very special word to me because joy, one of the things about joy for me, it's the absence of all suffering. So if we make a distinction between suffering and pain, I look at pain as being physical and suffering as being psychological. And one of the things that's been kind of moving around in our world is the idea that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So joy is about affinity and communion. I know from looking at a number of webinars, one of the things that's central to our health is a sense of community. In fact, people that have that sense of community, along with other things, live long and healthily. So, joy includes exhilaration in honoring happiness in others. Now, that's quite interesting. So, we're looking at the other now. So, we're honoring the happiness in others. Some of the gifts are expansion. So in joy, we expand. Communion or community. Inspiration. So often in a state of joy, we are inspired. Splendor, wonderful word. Radiance and bliss. One book we're going to talk about in the future is The Book of Joy, which is about an encounter between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu. Quite an extraordinary book. The internal statement is, thank you for this radiant moment. Now we're in a state of gratitude. And I just read the other day that gratitude is a combination of gratefulness plus attitude. Therefore, gratitude. Signs of obstruction: the inability to feel connected to humanity or to the greater world, or unwillingness to release joy and feel your other emotions. So, a really important reminder, when you simply notice emotions and mood states, do not judge those states as being good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse. I mean, it's quite natural for us to want to be in a constant state of joy. I don't know many people that are there. I think Tutu and the Dalai Lama are close. Some practices: celebrate your joyfulness and let it flow naturally. And by the way, I happen to think that joy is our natural state. Joy will seek you out if you let it move in your own time and in its own way. Let it move in its own time and in its own way, not in yours.